Holly Cotton here, and today's episode is going to be about a very common topic, and that is domestic violence. And what we're going to do is actually go into how domestic violence specifically affects Black women. And just to kind of give you some numbers and to see how important this topic is, Black women actually are only about 8% of the population. And when you look at the statistics of domestic violence, you see that about a quarter of domestic violence cases are with Black women. So there's a huge disparity between the population of Black women compared to how affected we are from this. And not only that, but the Black women that are being affected by domestic violence are more likely to die from that incident. So the rate of homicide for Black women that are part of domestic violent incidents are actually ending in a higher rate of homicide. And it is now being identified as one of the leading causes of death for Black women. So join in as we have a great discussion on some people that are making big changes in the community and women that are specifically focusing on Black women and domestic violence. First, we have Diane Curvey. And Diane Curvey is actually the Democratic nominee of the 280th District Court. And this is a court that focuses specifically on domestic violence cases. So welcome, Diane.
Thank you. How are you today?
Our next guest is going to be Caravan Cloud. And Carvana is a former Harris County prosecutor who has made it her mission to amplify the voice of underserved survivors of color. And her organization, Empowered Survivor, uses a focus of 5 key social health services that are needed to empower survivors of violence. Welcome back, Erika Johnson. You guys know her. She is a regular now here with the Black Women's PAC. She is the vice president of the Black Women's PAC. So welcome again, Erika. Okay, so Carvana, I'm going to start with you. Domestic violence is the number one cause of homicide for Black women. What factors contribute to this statistic?
First off, thank you for having this opportunity, having this forum, and allowing us to come together to have the conversation. I was raised to believe you don't treat the uncommon like it's common, and let's be honest, this topic is not something that's commonly discussed, but it's obviously something that is extremely uncommon. It's not uncommon, and it shouldn't be happening because it really does. It tears away at the strength of the Black family specifically. There are several things. Domestic violence in and of itself is a crime of power and control. A batterer may use various sources and ways to maintain power and control over that victim. So domestic violence may start off being psychological, might be emotionally draining, where that offender is, making threats or putting that survivor down in a way that's abusive. But then it might escalate to becoming a push or a hit or a slap. And it continues to escalate until a weapon is involved or strangulation can be involved. And ultimately, in too many cases, there are homicides that occur. Out of the 81 domestic violence homicides that occurred in this county last year, 42 involved women of color. And so when we talk about domestic violence, we certainly cannot just talk about it in numbers. So your question is right on. What are the causes? Why is domestic violence so prevalent? And in our work, what we've done, thanks to support by the Texas Council on Family Violence, the Harris County Domestic Violence Coordinating Council, what we've done is we sat down and we worked with survivors and we listened to them. We conducted focus groups and we did surveys to understand better what they were going through or who they were or what was the environment and society that they were living in as they were experiencing this abuse and et cetera. And what we learned is there were at least out of the 5 social determinants of health that exist according to the Center for Disease Control, which are neighborhood and environment, access to healthcare, social and community, economic stability, and education. When you talk about those 5 things, there's at least one of or more of those that are missing when you're talking about families who are impacted by domestic violence, especially in the Black community. So what that looks like is that might be a survivor whose partner tells them they don't need to work or they can't get a job for whatever reason. And that partner is the one that brings home the money. And so he or she could be very abusive and using that money as something to hang over their head, so that that victim might want to leave, but they know they have nowhere to go or nowhere to take care of their no way to take care of their kids or their family if they do. So they suffer in silence and make difficult choices, but a lot of times they suffer in silence and stay. It might also mean access to health care. Maybe the partner maintains the insurance and the victim doesn't, and the person is ill or has hypertension and diabetes, is under doctor's care, but cannot access health care on their own. And so they stay for that reason. It also has a lot to do with economic stability and demographics. There are certain communities that, frankly, are underserved. The resources are not there as far as providing a solid education and or for them or their children or other social services. So when one or more of those things are missing, that makes that person, that individual, much more vulnerable and susceptible to being a victim of power and control, which is ultimately what domestic violence is.
Okay, that's some good information. And you're so right about that. I can't tell you how many times I've like just logged on social media and I've seen women that are victims of homicide. And those are all like kind of the surrounding factors. Whenever you look at the genre and the themes of it, you're like, oh, okay, so it is. So I'm glad that you're definitely highlighting that and educating us on those factors. So Diane, going to you as an attorney, what disparities have you identified in the legal system that further victimizes Black women?
Okay, you can start with a court date. And this is how one court date can affect a Black woman. First of all, you've got a lack of child care. Where do you take your children? Children are not allowed in the courtroom. And if you're in a situation where you are trying to report domestic violence, who are you going to take them to? Your abuser's mother? Is she going to watch them for the day? Are you going to take them to your mother's house? They actually turn the children over to him. And so when you have a lack of child care, you can't go and conduct business at the protective order court. You can't go and conduct business at the different centers that are supposed to assist you, because you can't talk about this child's father in the presence of this child. Fear that the child may go back and tell dad, this is what happened today. Mama went to this place. Um, if you can overcome the lack of child care, then you have the issue of your job. Do you sacrifice a full day's pay for the protection of yourself and your children? Or do you go to work that day so that you can save money so that you can get away? The options, neither one are good. If you can overcome that, then you have transportation. Is the place on the bus line? Do you have money to ride the bus? If you don't ride the bus and you drive, can you pay for parking? Better yet, in this economy, can you pay for gas? And if you are a person who is economically disadvantaged in the relationship, then who has the vehicle? Does he take the vehicle to work? Do you drop him off? How does this thing work? And so if you can overcome that, then you've got the cost of counsel. Now, I'm an attorney. Attorneys have to eat like everyone else. And so we do charge. That's just the way that it goes. But the average American doesn't have $1,000 saved up for emergencies. And so if the average American doesn't have $1,000 saved up, think about what the average Black woman has saved up. Everything that she has goes to her children and to their survival. And so those four things alone affect a person going to court one time. And that's what I think are the disparities that are stopping Black women from being able to prosecute cases of domestic violence.
Thank you so much, Diane, for telling us those points because, again, just as a common person, we don't even realize that anyone that's not in the legal field, we don't even identify those as issues. We're just like, oh, they're going to jail, they're going to court, lock them up, so we don't even understand, like you said, the ramifications that come with something as simple as just a court date and how to enforce these laws. So thank you for giving us that insight. Now, Erika, let me ask you this, because I know we've talked a couple of times about reproductive health and Roe versus Wade overturning and things like that. So now that Texas has banned all abortions in Texas, do you think that we will see an increase in domestic violence?
Unfortunately, yes. And I think this is the consequence of electing out of touch politicians to elect us. They either don't know or simply just do not care how these laws affect our communities. And it really pains me to think of a woman who is currently experiencing domestic violence and how the abortion ban can now be weaponized against her to either be forced into a pregnancy or to be a victim of homicide due to an unwanted pregnancy. I think when most people think about rapists, they think about, the shadowy figure that's lying in wait. But the reality is that most women know they're rapists. And I know that Governor Abbott said that he would eliminate rape from the state of Texas. We have yet to see that happen or see a plan, a tangible plan to come out of that. But we do know two things to be true. Women will continue to be raped and women will continue to be victimized by these laws. And so it's far more complicated than just running to the store and getting a plan B, as Governor Abbott suggested when dealing with rape and domestic violence.
Yes, excellent points about that too. And I'm glad that you did talk about that whenever you're talking about Governor Abbott. One, that clip is all over social media, and everyone is still in awe that that was his reply to that about rapes and incest and a plan B. So I'm glad that you did reference that. And so let me ask you this, as Black Women's PAC, do you think that the voters understand the importance of elections and how it impacts issues such as domestic violence?
I think this election cycles that voters will connect the dots. This election cycle, I know that people used to say, and I was even one of these people when I was younger, that I'm not into politics or politics doesn't matter. Well, you got to get into politics because politics is into you, and it will dictate every aspect of your life. And so, if you're not paying attention, you need to wake up and pay attention, especially if you're a Black woman in the state of
I'm
Texas.
sorry. Yeah, I just wanted to add to that. Erica is spot on. When you're growing up, you don't really think, you're trying to get that coming out of college, you're getting a job, trying to figure out what your life looks like. And politics, let me speak for myself. It was for the older folks, right? I saw my mom and my aunt, and they were all involved. And it didn't seem like that was something that, I should be involved in. But once I got in it, I realized, oh, this is exactly where I need to be. Oh, and oh, not a lot of people around here look like me. So, how in the world are we going to expect people that don't look like us or have our life experiences or our perspective to represent us? That is the huge gap. So, when you have someone like a Diane Curvey, who so successfully has secured that nomination, and we're so excited about, who can actually sit on that bench and just as eloquently as she described those four simple barriers that prevent Black women from getting justice in the legal system, she's going to be able to sit so eloquently and hear both sides and make fair decisions because she's going to understand that, because she has that perspective. And given the disproportionality with regard to domestic violence and how it impacts Black women or women of color more than their white counterparts, that's the type of experience we need. So if you're not involved, get involved. And that could mean just as simple as making a few phone calls, passing out a few cards, or working the polls on election day. It doesn't mean you have to have a whole lot of money. I thought back in the day you had to have a whole lot of money to be involved in politics. Money helps, not saying that it doesn't. But if you're not in that space, you can give other ways. I got a candidate looking at me like, don't say that. No, but Erica couldn't have been more on point with that. So
Well, thank you for your input. And Carvana, I want to come back to you also, because can you tell us more about your organization and how it helps stop the cycles of domestic violence?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Nothing brings me more joy than talking about how we can support Black women, and so they're no longer re-victimized in this community. The Empowered Survivor is the name of the organization. It's a social health organization designed to protect and reduce domestic violence in the African American community, specifically in regards to African American females. A lot of people have said, well, domestic violence impacts everybody. Why don't you open up your doors to help everybody? My doors are open to always help everybody. But what's going on is that there's no strategically targeted effort to end domestic violence, homicides, and near lethal cases within the Black community. So that's the space I operate in. So we make sure we get in touch with those women who are not picking up the phone and calling police, for example, because even though HPD had 35,000 calls for domestic violence, as far as calls for service, we still know that there's at least another 35,000 that are sadly not picking up that phone because they don't trust law enforcement, because they've had bad experiences, or they're just simply scared. That's who we target. So with key relationships with community centers, apartment complexes, and churches, and even restaurants that target our population, we're looking for to support and prevent domestic violence between the ages of 18 and 40. So we go where they eat, where they go to church, where they wash their clothes. We are a grassroots organization designed to provide services based on the 5 social determinants of health, because we're trying to get in and prevent future violence and that homicide from occurring. And it's been really successful, and mainly because we listen. We do a lot of listening, and we are grassroots, and we've got a lot of private funding, which I'm very blessed about. But you know what that does? That allows us to be not just the organization that needs to check a dot or get a tally because they got money from the federal government and they can't do this and they can't do that and they can't do this. I trust me, I'm looking and I'm applying for grants all the time, but I love being in a space where I'm not restricted, because the restrictions also with funding and policy wise with how organizations get these dollars have also prevented us as a domestic violence industry from doing more and reaching out to serve more people that are on that outskirts. So that's what the Empowered Survivor does. And because even though we have that target market to prevent domestic violence and related homicides with Black women, we work with other agencies, BIPOC agencies like Casa Juan Diego, the Anissa Hope Center, DIA, Boat People SOS, to provide the legal services like Diane was talking about earlier. I'm an attorney by trade. I know we've talked about that, but we have a legal department that actually helps sign up to be the counsel to go in with those survivors, but they always are going to have that advocate that understands their culture, that speaks that language. And so working together with those other BIPOC agencies has been truly, truly impactful. We got to have each other's back, because when you're small BIPOC agencies, it's hard to stand out here alone. And so the Empowered Survivor works really hard to bring everybody together so we can fight this together.
Okay, great information. And I'm glad, one, that you were able to talk about all of those things that your organization does that a lot of people maybe don't even know are crucial to that. Now, let me just ask you this question, Carvana. Let me ask you this. Say I am a woman, and I am in a domestic violence situation in my home right now. What is the biggest piece of advice that you would recommend for me? Or if, say, there's a listener right now that's like, okay, wait a minute, I feel like I'm in this. I feel like I'm going through this. I feel like I've been, like Diane talked about, I feel like I tried to press charges and this was what was going on, and now I feel helpless. So as a person, say I'm in a domestic violence situation right now, what are some like quick things that you can tell me, do this, or what I need to do and how I can help?
Sure. I think one of the main things that I think there are a couple of things. I think first, there is a national domestic violence hotline that I'm a big proponent of, and you can call that hotline and say just that. Hey, I heard something. I think I'm in a bad situation. I don't even know how to start, but I need to tell you, can you help me? And when you call the National Domestic Violence Hotline, they will ask certain questions that will elicit information that will help you figure out which way you need to go. The beautiful part about the hotline is they can also properly connect you to agencies in your community we're one of those agencies that will be able to help you on the ground level. So I will definitely make sure that that number is shared here for the podcast, as well as our number at the Empowered Survivor. But I think that's one way. If you're in a situation that's a little bit more dangerous, or you feel like your life is in danger, I'm always going to say call 911. All right. I know it's hard. I know it's not easy, but I want to make sure people are safe. And I think that's the challenge we have in law enforcement, right? And even as attorneys, even on the civil and family side, we have to we got to do a lot to make sure people feel comfortable with calling law enforcement because they don't. So we have to continue to fix that, to address that, right? But you're talking about centuries and centuries and centuries of issues and abuse and all of that with law enforcement, but we're working on it. So I get why some people don't call, but I'm telling you, if you are in a dangerous situation, or if a weapon's been involved, or you've been strangled, or you're at that higher level that comes right before homicide, you need to call 911. And Diane, do you have any other thoughts on that?
I do. With the court that I'm going to prayerfully be sitting in the 280th, what I want people to understand is that you can file a protective order without actually going through calling 911. Because when a person has to call 911, they are afraid that the police are going to come and that CPS may get involved, because one of the grounds for termination now is domestic violence. That the person that gets arrested is not going to make it to work on Monday. And if he doesn't make it to work on Monday, then he's going to get fired, and then they're not going to have anywhere to stay. That the person that they are trying to have arrested may actually be shot or killed by the police because of all of the volatile police actions that they've seen on the news. And so what can be done, and what I plan to do in this court, is to put together an online service to teach people how to file their own protective order. And if you can file your own protective order, you can get the protection that you need. He can stay out of jail. He can continue to go to work. And if you have a child support order, you will continue to get your money. Those are things that people are worried about. They're worried about life and death situations. They're not necessarily worried about the person going to prison, because if the person ends up going to jail, the only thing that's going to happen is that they're going to have to take the rent money and bail that person out so that they can make it to work on Monday. All of this is economic based. And if there's an economic inequality, then the person who's on the short end of the stick is the one who's getting the abuse. And I want to make certain that that doesn't happen.
Thank you for that perspective, Diane, because as you were talking, I was like, this makes perfect sense. It's so logical now, but as someone not in that situation, I don't even think of it. So thank you for giving us that aspect. And I know that was one thing that you gave us was about the protective order. So what can women do to protect themselves now other than that protective order? What other advice do you have about how women can protect themselves?
So what I do with my clients, because I've been practicing for 17 years, I help them to create an exit strategy. And the rule number one is keep your mouth shut. Don't tell anyone what you're doing. Don't tell him, I plan on leaving you. Don't tell your mother, because she can be bribed. Don't tell your girlfriends, because they may be jealous. Don't tell anyone, and especially do not tell your children, because they will tell it. You've got to stay off social media. Don't post every time you go somewhere, everything that you do, every meal that you have. Don't do it. You need to stay off the grid. You've got to take location trackers off your phone. And most importantly, take the location trackers and the Find My iPhone off your kids' phone and tablets, because you know you're going to take it with them when you leave. You've got to know where you're going to go, which means you have to do your research in advance to find the proper shelter that's going to take you and your children. When you leave, it needs to be strategic. You need to know exactly where you're going, which bus you're going to take, how much money you're going to need in order to do it, and how long it's going to take you to get there. Real important, you've got to keep your head on a swivel. Just because you make it to a shelter does not mean that you are safe. It means that you're at a shelter. And if you think for 1 minute that they can't look up which shelters there are, or they can't get their sisters or their aunties to call, because people who have a history of domestic violence in their family, they don't necessarily see domestic violence as bad. And so they will end up helping that abuser to find you, because that's not right. You shouldn't have taken away his kids. No, I'm protecting my children and keeping them out of CPS custody. Um, you got to save, save, save. Now, I love my lashes. I love my nails. I love my hair. But at some point, you may have to say, I'm going to wear my natural nails, I'm going to wear my natural lashes, and I'm going to wear my natural hair. Because the money that you spend on that, you can use to save for your getaway. And yeah, you may look like Harriet Tubman when you get away, but you will be free, free, free. And that is the main goal, to be free from abuse. And those are the things that I tell my clients.
All excellent points. Thank you for that, Diane, because I didn't even think about those things. But yeah, you're right. We're so accustomed to a lifestyle. We're so accustomed to posting everything, doing everything. So we have to move in silence when you're trying to escape. So, Diane, let me just go to you to kind of sum up everything that we already have talked about. Any closing call to action advice that you want to give? And then also, how can we support you with your campaign? Okay, thank you for that information, and I will have everything in the podcast notes as well, and in the caption I'll have everything tagged also, so you guys can go straight, direct, clickable links. And so,
Holly, if I could just jump in, I definitely just
yeah,
want
go
to
ahead.
thank I want to thank Carvana and Diane for joining us today. I think it's so important for people to see women, especially women of color, out in the community that are advocating, that are running point on these issues. And so, thank you all for joining us today. As Black women, we're taught to be strong. We're taught to, shoulder everything, especially with an issue such as sensitive as domestic violence. I feel like we're more susceptible to keep it in. But when we see people that look like us, women that look like us, on the forefront of these issues, I think it creates a pathway for a solution. So thank you all so much for joining us today.
Yes, thank you. And before, Carvana, can you tell us about your organization, how to support, and your any contact information as well for anyone that's listening?
Sure. Again, thank you so much for having us, Attorney Curvey. Thank you so much for your that exit strategy that you provided. Your heart and your passion and your sincerity just comes out in every word that you say, and we are so blessed to have you on that slate to work for Harris County. I love that. I love that. Empowered Survivor, you can follow us or learn more about the Empowered Survivor at empoweredsurvivorproject.org. Empoweredsurvivorproject.org. There's information there. If you need to send us a message, you can send us a message on there. I'll also provide Holly a phone number for you later if people want to call. Most importantly, I think I just want to leave by saying you are not alone. Don't you don't have to feel like you're alone. This is our life's work. And there's so many other folks out there that are doing this work and want to help our fellow sister because we want to uplift and empower. That's exactly why I started the Empowered Survivor. God has been so good to me and he's blessed me. But I am a child survivor of domestic violence, and so I watched my mother suffer my entire childhood, and I understand what those consequences and circumstances are as a child and the impact. And I don't want any other child to experience that. I don't want any other woman to experience that. And so understand how wonderfully made you are and call us. We're here to help you. We're here to support you. And together we are in the business about transforming victims into survivors. And so with that, I will give it back to you and again say thank you very, very much.
Okay, great. Thank you for that information. So thank you again. This is Holly Cotton. We have Erika Johnson, Vice President of Black Women's PAC Texas. Thank you, thank you, Miss Diane Curvey, and then Miss Corvina Cloud. Thank you, ladies, so much for joining us today.